1966, a year when America was deep in the Vietnam War. Urban riots were erupting across the country, and the counterculture movement was gaining momentum. Yet through the tumult, music provided an escape. Today, we're exploring 5 iconic songs that define that pivotal year. Strangers in the Night by Frank Sinatra, shot to number 1 in 1966.
Strangers in the night, exchanging glances.
Coming at a time when Old Blue Eyes was actually struggling to stay relevant. Many don't realize Sinatra initially hated this song, calling it a piece of shit and the worst fucking song I've ever heard. He reluctantly recorded it only after heavy pressure from his record label, who were desperate for a hit to counter the British invasion that was threatening to make crooners like Sinatra obsolete. The song was actually first offered to Mel Torme, who also rejected it. Despite his disdain, Strangers in the Night revitalized Sinatra's career completely, earning him a Grammy for Record of the Year and becoming one of his signature songs. The irony wasn't lost on Sinatra, who continued to publicly mock the song even as he performed it at nearly every concert until his death in 1998. His daughter Nancy later revealed he particularly despised the doobie-doobie-doo scat singing at the end, which was actually improvised during recording because he'd forgotten the arranged ending. What many listeners don't know is that Strangers in the Night was originally an instrumental piece titled Betty Bye, composed for a forgotten 1966 film called A Man Could Get Killed. The melody was written by Bert Kaempfert, while the lyrics were added later by Charles Singleton and Eddie Snider. The song has since been covered by over 400 artists in multiple languages, proving that sometimes the songs we resist the most become our greatest legacies. Next up is Kicks by Paul Revere of the Raiders. A song that stands as one of the first anti-drug songs in rock history, long before public service announcements became commonplace. Formed in 1958 in Boise, Idaho, Paul Revere of the Raiders cultivated a revolutionary war-inspired image that some music historians argue was a calculated marketing ploy to set them apart from British invasion bands. What's rarely discussed is how their patriotic image helped them avoid the backlash that many other bands faced during the politically charged 1960s, essentially allowing them to hide somewhat conservative values behind revolutionary costumes. The band's career took an unusual turn in the 1970s after their commercial peak. Lead singer Mark Lindsay, who sang lead on Kicks, left the band in 1975, which began a long period of Paul Revere touring with various lineups. In what critics often dismissed as a nostalgia act, Revere continued performing until his death in 2014, never achieving the critical respect given to many of his contemporaries, despite having charted 23 consecutive hit singles. Today, the band continues as Paul Revere's Raiders under the leadership of Revere's son, primarily playing casinos and state fairs to audiences looking to revisit their youth. A little-known fact about Kicks is that it was written by Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil after they witnessed a friend struggling with heroin addiction. The song was originally intended for Eric Burdon of the Animals, who rejected it. When Paul Revere and the Raiders recorded it, they weren't fully aware of its anti-drug message, thinking it was more about general thrills. The band's television exposure on Where the Action Is helped propel the song up the charts, though radio stations began pulling it once they realized its subject matter, only to reinstate it as the anti-drug message gained public approval. Are you enjoying this trip down memory lane? If so, don't keep these musical memories to yourself. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel now. We want to hear from you. What memories do these songs bring back? Share your stories in the comments below. Did you see any of these bands live? Tell us about it. And don't forget to share this video with friends who appreciate real music from an era when songs had substance. Now let's dive into The Sounds of Silence by Simon & Garfunkel.
Within the sound of silence.
A song with one of the most unusual journeys to success in music history. Originally released in 1964 on the album Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., the song initially flopped so badly that Paul Simon left the U.S. for England, convinced his music career was over, while Art Garfunkel returned to college. What many don't know is that Columbia Records producer Tom Wilson, without Simon and Garfunkel's knowledge or permission, took their acoustic recording and added electric instruments and drums to capitalize on the folk rock trend Bob Dylan had started. The controversy around this unauthorized remix remains a sore point. Simon later said he cried when he first heard it. The modified version became a hit in late 1965, reaching number 1 in January of 1966, prompting Simon to hastily return from England to reunite with Garfunkel. Their relationship was always tumultuous, with jealousies and creative differences that would eventually lead to multiple breakups. By the time The Sounds of Silence became a hit, the tension was already evident. Simon, who wrote almost all their material, often felt Garfunkel received disproportionate attention, while Garfunkel felt Simon didn't appreciate his vocal contributions. Today, both are in their 80s and have reunited occasionally over the decades, though each reunion seems to reopen old wounds rather than to heal them. The imagery in The Sounds of Silence was partly inspired by Paul Simon's habit of writing songs in his bathroom with the lights off. He later explained that the darkness helped him to concentrate, and the line, "Hello darkness, my old friend," emerged from this peculiar songwriting ritual. Additionally, the song took on new cultural significance when it was used in the final scene of the 1967 film The Graduate, cementing it as an anthem for the disconnection and disillusionment felt by many young Americans in the late 1960s. Yellow Submarine by the Beatles represents a significant departure from their earlier work, showcasing their willingness to experiment beyond typical love songs. Written primarily by Paul McCartney as a children's song for Ringo Starr to sing, many critics at the time accused the Beatles of selling out or dumbing down their music. What wasn't widely known was the tension this song created within the band. John Lennon had minimal involvement and privately expressed disdain for what he considered a Paul song rather than a true Beatles collaboration. By 1966, the Beatles were beginning to function less as a cohesive unit and more as individual artists sharing the same recording space. After stepping away from touring in 1966, partly due to the controversy surrounding John Lennon's "more popular than Jesus" comment, the Beatles' studio work became more sophisticated, though Yellow Submarine stands as an outlier to this trend. The song would later inspire an animated film that many fans don't realize George Harrison and John Lennon barely participated in, reflecting their growing disengagement. Today, the song remains one of their most recognized works, though music historians often rank it among their least innovative compositions. The remaining Beatles, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, both in their 80s now, still include the song in their live performances, embracing its simplicity and universal appeal. During the recording of Yellow Submarine, the Beatles created a chaotic party atmosphere in the studio, gathering friends and staff to generate the background noise heard in the song. Among those present were Rolling Stones members Mick Jagger and Brian Jones, as well as Beatles road manager Mal Evans, who can be heard counting 1, 2, 3, 4 in the background. Producer George Martin contributed the brass band effect using a Hammond organ, while sound effects were sourced from EMI's collection, including chains being dragged through buckets of water and cash registers being wrung underwater. The track marked one of the first extensive uses of sound effects in a pop song, pioneering techniques that would later become standard in psychedelic recordings. Finally, Bus Stop by the Hollies captures the essence of British pop in the mid-1960s, though the band never achieved the same level of fame in America as their contemporaries. Formed in Manchester in 1962, the Hollies named themselves after Buddy Holly, setting up an often overlooked rivalry with other British bands like the Beatles, named partly after Buddy Holly's band, the Crickets. What many music historians don't discuss is how the Hollies were actually more commercially consistent than many of their more celebrated peers, placing at least one song on the UK charts every year from 1963 to 1974. A record of consistency that even the Beatles couldn't match due to their earlier breakup. The Hollies continued performing through various lineup changes, with drummer Bobby Elliott and guitarist Tony Hicks remaining from the classic lineup to this day. Their harmonies influenced countless bands, including Crosby, Stills, and Nash, which former Hollies member Graham Nash formed after leaving in 1968. Nash's departure stemmed from frustration when the band rejected his song, Marrakesh Express. later a hit for CSN, and refused to record more experimental material. The band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2010, though many argue this recognition came decades too late, reflecting an American bias in how British invasion bands are remembered. Bus Stop was written by Graham Goldman, who would later form 10cc and write hits for other bands including the Yardbirds and Herman's Hermits. Goldman was inspired to write the song while riding on a bus in Manchester, England during a rainstorm. He observed a man and woman sharing an umbrella at a bus stop, which sparked the song's concept. The recording features an unusual introduction played on classical guitar by Tony Hicks, who had never played classical guitar before. He purchased the instrument specifically for the recording session and learned the part on the spot, completing it in just 3 takes. As we close this journey through 1966, remember, these songs weren't just popular tunes. They were the soundtrack to a changing world. From civil rights to Vietnam, these artists captured the spirit of an era that shaped many of your lives. If you enjoyed these stories behind the hits, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the music that defined our times. Until next time, keep those records spinning.